Welcome to the PDIA in Action event series. My name is Salimah Samji, and I am the Director of Building State Capability at the Harvard Center for International Development. I will be your moderator today. The format of today's session is as follows. I will begin with an overview of this event series, followed by a presentation before we open for questions and answers. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat during the presentation. Matt Andrews and I co-teach MLD 103M, a field lab class where students learn how to use the PDIA approach, problem-driven iterative adaptation approach, by working on real-world problems. They learn by doing. The students work together in teams with an authorizer or a client who gives them a problem to work on. This year, we asked the alumni of our Implementing Public Policy Executive Program to nominate problems for our students. Over a 7-week period between January and March, our students worked with their authorizers to better understand the problem and to identify entry points. This event series showcases the learning of our students as well as our alumni. Our topic for today's session is police and community relations in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And with us, we have our student team, Anne Dietterich, Awab Elmesbah, Amreen Bashir, Gyang Pham, Revanth Voothaluru, and Seun Akinfolarin. Welcome. The students worked with Milzy Carrasco, the Director of Neighborhood Engagement for the City of Lancaster and Implementing Public Policy Executive Program alumni, as well as the Interim Police Chief in Lancaster. I'd now like to invite Anne to get us started. Anne, over to you.
Thank you so much. Let me just start our presentation. We're gonna kick it off with a bit of information about the context that our problem was in.
Hello, everyone.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everyone. We're glad to be here with you today and to share our experience working with PDIA, a problem-driven iterative adaptation approach to policy implementation. We've been working for 7 weeks on police-community relations in Lancaster City, as Salimah mentioned. And to give you a brief context, last summer, there was a police-involved shooting that led to the killing of a citizen in Lancaster, and this coincided with the nationwide protests against police brutality and led to deepening tensions in police-community relations in the city. The police chief in the city stepped down then, and a new interim police chief was appointed. And we've been working with the community engagement director in the city and the interim police chief on this challenge of how the city can really build healthy police community relations in Lancaster. So next slide, Anne. Let me start with the approach that we took. And I have 2 points here. The first is the approach we took is problem driven. And although it is intuitive to start with the problem, it is very tempting to jump to preconceived solutions. So we spend a lot of time learning about the problem. The process of constructing and deconstructing the problem, as we will see, has 2 main purposes, beside, of course, understanding the problem. The first is it is an opportunity to engage stakeholders from the beginning into the process or in the process of addressing the problem. And the second is when people see how the problem solved looks like, this provides great motivation for work and keeps people focused on the end goal, really. So we've been working on the problem definition, and in addition to reviewing documents and researching how other cities dealt with similar challenges, we did a lot of interviews with city officials, with police officers, with city councillors, with civil society leaders, and city residents. And we developed hypotheses about the problem and tried to test these hypotheses through these conversations, as we will see. The other point is the approach is iterative. It emphasizes iteration and adaptation. It also seems intuitive, but this is because we deal with a complex problem. So for us, in simple terms, a complex problem is a problem that we do not have a standard solution for. It is not like building a big infrastructure project or doing a complicated surgery. Although they are difficult tasks and require significant technical knowledge, at the end of the day, they are protocols and ways of doing things. But complex problems require a lot of learning because we don't know really what is the solution, and requires a lot of iteration and adaptation. Next. So we'll start with a brief description of the problem and what we think are some of the causes, the potential entry points to address the problem, and some suggested ideas that we came up with, and some strategies for further learning. The problem as we see it is the lack of trust between key groups in the community, the police and the city government. So at the core, it's a relationship problem and it's a people problem. In such cases, perceptions matter more than reality. For instance, it matters little if the city supports police officers, if police officers think that they aren't supported. It matters less if the police thinks that they are accountable and transparent, if people think that they are not. And that is why there are multiple perspectives on the problem. For some people, the problem started last summer with the shooting and the nationwide protests. For others, there is really nothing new. It's a historical problem. It has been there for decades. For others, there are some old good days that they want to go back to, where relationship was really good. So there are a lot of perspectives. And the challenge is how to define the problem in ways that speak to different groups and that recognize each party's responsibilities and work. And it is true that national events as well as police-involved shooting last year contributed to the heat and brought the tensions to new level, but it is important to recognize that the problem is also due to deep historical racial divide and long-standing tensions between minority communities and the police, both in Lancaster and everywhere in the United States. So the problem at the core is a trust problem, and this was our starting point. And I will hand over to Amreen to speak about some of the key causes we have explored throughout this journey.
Thanks so much, Awab. So what you are looking at right now is a fishbone diagram. And what we've done is we've deconstructed the problem to different clauses. And within each of the clauses, we've identified subclauses that contribute to the clause and eventually the overall problem, as Awab mentioned. So we have 6 main clauses, which is poor communication, lack of transparency, a national political climate, and historical divide, institutional and systemic issues, the siloing of the police, and issues with police behavior. The last 2 on the very end, the national political climate, as well as institutional and systemic issues, most of that you see is in blue, and blue indicates things that are bigger than Lancaster, that it's happening all over the nation and in some cases in other nations as well. So those are subclauses that are not just immediate to Lancaster itself. The subclauses that you see in red are ones that are not being addressed, or we feel are not being addressed from all of our meetings that we've had with the various stakeholders as well as authorizers. And then the ones in yellow are what we think that they're already they've identified, and so the police department as well as the mayor's office has identified and are working on. So I'm going to focus on poor communication, lack of transparency, siloing of the police, and issues with police behavior, and I'll focus on a couple of subclauses within each of them. So the first one, with poor communication, we found if you look at police and city are not able to capture key voices, stakeholders have told us that a lot of the voices were not heard, are the ones who were protesting, and the people who were arrested, they have no voice. No one was listening to them, and there was no follow-up with the protesters and the protests from the end to gauge ideas that they have. They also talked about the need to include people who have been previously arrested for low-level charges, such as marijuana-related charges, which are now legal, to listen to them as well, to see their perspective of the whole process and what they what their perception of the police are. In addition to people who live in neighborhoods that are heavily policed, their viewpoints also matter a lot. They also had a suggestion where they asked that the police chief, the mayor, the office, and the department should be listening in community centers and listening to public informally, and that to include other departments such as the housing department, because this issue is not just only a matter of policing, it goes wider. Then if you look at our other subclause, which is lack of communication, either too narrow or non-existent channels used by the city and the police department, the stakeholders felt that the creation of a forum for community police issues, that was great, but that it needs to be a part of the fiber of the city, and it needs to be an ongoing exchange. They also praised the police community group, but said that there should be more public, and that the Engaged Lancaster Forum, which is a forum where the residents can communicate with the officials, that to promote and use that to highlight what the city's different departments have been doing and to gauge feedback. Then we're moving on to the left, to lack of transparency. And specifically, we'll look at community not aware of police policies and procedures. Stakeholders mentioned that there's no awareness in the community on challenges that exist within a police official's work. And there's not also enough avenues to educate the community on the version of issues that the police officers have. And on the flip side, police were worried about the Citizens Review Board, and they were unsure of how that would operate. In some of the interviews, respondents also indicated that more transparency is needed from the police after incidents occur. For example, the kind of transparency that followed the recent shooting of Richard Muniz, who was a resident of Lancaster. The follow-up that had was a rare practice, and that should be more commonplace. Moving below, if you look at the isolation of the police, siloing of the police, and the perception of police being perceived as not approachable, people felt that there are barriers to simple communication between the community members and police officers, and that the police officers need to step away from always being in uniform so that there could be informal exchange. And also about that, the stakeholders commented that they see police mostly inside their cars, and that's also a barrier to informal communication. And a suggestion was that they have more out of the car experiences, for example, 15 minutes of each hour where they can walk around the neighborhood or walk around the block. And if you look at our other subclause, which is no direct or frequent communication, so lack of informal bonding between the community, no direct or frequent communication between the police and community. We've heard a lot that there's very little communication and conversation that's going on between the two sets, two groups, between the community and the police officer, that it's rare to just see or hear about exchanges, casual exchanges happening, and rare to see compassion on either end for each other. One comment that I could quote was that the first introduction to the police should not be in handcuffs. On the flip side, the police also feel that there is an unreasonable expectation that a police officer should be engaged all the time with the community. And then if you look at issues with police behavior, our last clause that we will look at, the subclause of staff makeup, currently there's no requirement that the police officers live in the city that they work. And so most of the police officers in Lancaster City actually do not live there. And there's a lot of perception that the police makeup does not represent the city. However, we've also heard that many demographics of Lancaster City have a negative impression of the police, and as such, they're not as incentivized to get into the police force or to try to get into the police force. So it's a hard balance to try to create. And then there were also questions about police ability and training to handle many issues such as mental illness. However, the police are looking at this, and they've hired social workers and are in the process of hiring more social workers, which is why we've deemed this subclause yellow. There are ongoing reforms happening. Then if you look at accountability, and there's a very large quote that one of the stakeholders said that was quite good, but I will paraphrase it. And what they said was that if you have the knowledge that you can do anything and get away with it, then the first reaction will always be to reach for the gun rather than trying to have discussions. And so that's kind of what, in essence, that we've heard over and over again in many different ways from stakeholders when they think about police accountability, that there is very little accountability. And within the department and from other stakeholders, another thing that we've heard was that there needs to be better leadership communication channels, better communication channels between the police leadership and the police officers, so that they could be more supportive of, there could be more open methods of accountability, and that they could be supported more in different areas, that police officers themselves can be supported more in different areas, and that they have the interest of the community when they, and the interest of the new police officers when they are thinking about new policies. So what the other three things that you see on the fishbone diagram, which are those circles, are our AAA analysis. And a AAA analysis is basically us trying to think about the different places where we have where our authorizers can create change. And each of so a AAA stands for authority, so the authority to engage. For example, who has the authority to engage? Is it is it legal authority? Is it informal authority? Or which of the authorizers might actually support this engagement? Then we've got acceptance. So who are the agents, people, or organization that have an interest in this work and that are engaged with this? And then we have ability, which is who has the ability to do it? Who are the personnel to do it? What kind of resources do they have to have the ability to actually enact this change? So I will let Zhang, if she can connect, because I see her here, take it further to our entry point.
I'm not sure if Jan can join. Can you go?
Yeah, so I'm back. And so if you, just as I was saying about the AAA, so if you look at, so we've identified three areas from the fishbone diagram, which we think of as potential entry points. And we've identified where the balance of ability, acceptance, and authority are. So if you look at isolation of police, there is a high authority and high ability. There are resources and personnel, and the police department and the mayor's office, they were invested in this. They're the people who are, they are the people who are dealing with this task, but there's medium acceptance. So in this stage, we think that there's still a change space. It's small, but there's still a change space for them to enact different policies and get more buy-in. If you look at within the strand of issues with police behavior, there is high ability. The police department definitely has the authority. They definitely have the resources to that from the city and themselves. There isn't that much acceptance, and there is mid authority. And so in this case, we think that there's very they need to focus on they need to focus on acceptance and the authority in order to create a larger change space to be able to actually conduct, enact reforms that can have an impact. And then if you look at our last strand, which is poor communication, again, we've identified that has high authority, high acceptance, but mid to low ability. However, the police department is aware of this, and they are hiring more personnel to help with their communication channels. So, for example, the last time that we had our meeting, we knew that they were going to hire a communications officer who was more able to streamline that. So there is that, they have a small change space there, but they're already enacting changes in that space. So thank you so much, and I will pass it on to Anne.
Great, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the ideas that we came up with for how our authorizers might begin this work. And you heard from Amreen how difficult it was when we were talking with each stakeholder, that trying to figure out what the problem was, because so often we would say, what do you see as the problem? And they would propose a solution. So you'd say, what's the problem? And they'd say, oh, police officers need to come out of their cars and talk to us. It's like, well, that's a solution. Tell us about the problem. So some of these solutions have come, or some of these ideas for solutions have come from our stakeholder conversations, and some of them have come from external best practices. We found a couple different cities that have been sort of pioneering some other policing techniques that seem to be a little bit better at building community trust. And I'm going to divide these into each of the areas that we suggested tackling. And just going back to what Awab started us out with, that this is all iterative. These are things to test and to try out. So we're not experts in policing or experts in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This is from what we've heard about the problem. How do we think they should start learning more about the problem, and what are some things that they can try that might help them build towards a solution? So when it comes to poor communications, they have made some progress. They have a community police working group, but those meetings have been sort of larger scale meetings and haven't necessarily been a space for constructive dialogue and really engaged dialogue. So we are recommending that our authorizers and a core team of other officials, either from the police department or from the mayor's office, take 15 to 20 minutes every week to have a conversation with a community member. And in each of those conversations, they should ask two key questions. The first, what do you think we should be doing? And the second is, who else do you think I should talk to? Because with every single stakeholder meeting that we had, with every community member, they said, oh, my uncle had this experience, or my coworker had this experience. You should talk to them. You should talk to this person. And so really building this network of sort of understanding and knowledge throughout the community, and that will help bring out some of those voices. And a big portion of this is really just about continuing the learning about the problem, but it has the side benefit that having these dialogues can be a trust building exercise as they go through it. We have also suggested that they test and iterate on the communication channels they have. They have an online portal, this Engage Lancaster platform, which they have used, and it's a positive space for community input, and it can be anonymous or with their names, and they can engage with city officials and police officers there. Unfortunately, it hasn't been very well used. I'm not sure if many people in the city are aware of it. It didn't seem like many of the people we talked to had heard of this platform. And we're hoping that the new communications officer will be able to sort of build on those communications, really make use of the social media channels and the website to just see how they can reach out to the community. And then also, as they're going, test and make sure that these communication channels are really working, have conversations to see if the outreach is actually reaching the people. We are recommending that the police department prioritize and incentivize police attendance at community events and meetings, to start building accountability within the police department that engaging with the community is a necessary part of their work. It seems like often this is sort of not a priority within the department, so making it really seem like a priority that these officers are engaging. And also with this engagement, it was suggested to us a couple times that the officers would ideally be either in uniform but without any weapons, or out of uniform, to sort of create a more even playing field for these conversations and to get around some of the issues with power dynamics in these meetings. We suggested conducting surveys into community perception. It sounds like there are areas in which it's hard for the city government and the police to really hear what quieter voices are thinking and feeling, especially sort of older residents that may not be attending protests or community meetings. So figuring out how to do surveys, go into communities and ask these questions. And then we pulled one idea from an external best practice, which is from, I believe, Camden, New Jersey's police department, where every new officer, the first day that they are a police officer, their job is to go into the neighborhood that they'll be policing and knock on everybody's door and ask them how they can serve them better and introduce themselves to start building those one-on-one relationships. So a couple different venues for them to see if they can build better communication and trust. When it comes to the isolation of the police, this actually ends up overlapping a fair bit with the communication. When it comes to integrating the police department with the city government and other departments, this is something they've made huge progress on. The current interim chief Bay, has done a really fantastic job bringing the city government into police department meetings and bringing the police department into the fire department and the city government meetings, and really forming those links within the city. So this is something they've already made a lot of progress with. And they've also restructured the physical space within the police department to make this more feasible. So the first floor of the police department, when you enter, it is now a much more inviting space. It's where the community outreach officers are, and it's much more comfortable for people to enter into the police department. So it is, they're trying to sort of open the doors to the department. We are taking our stakeholder recommendations to implement requirements for out-of-car experiences. They've started making progress on this as well with a new bicycle unit. But so many of these community members really highlighted that it's important for the police to be out in neighborhoods in a different way than they're out in their neighborhoods when they're responding to calls. So that creating these opportunities for engagement in low pressure, low stakes situations is an important way to sort of integrate the police with the communities, especially when they're not living in these communities. We are recommending that they promote examples of good policing to highlight the value of the police to the community and to help counteract some of these biases, because we really did hear that there's bias coming from both sides. There's a lot of bias within the police department about the community, but there also is some bias within the community about the police department. And then finally, and this is something that they have also initiated since Chief Bay started, is that they've developed a set of values and a mission statement. And they've started working that into sort of the training and the policing work, but also making sure that that's something that the community is seeing and understanding, and even has input in on what are their values, what do they want to see in their police department. Finally, and this is probably the toughest area for engagement, is working on the issues with police behavior. So one of the most accessible entry points we identified is just to give officers opportunities to engage informally. This goes back to those out of car experiences where, like, the more police are seeing the community and in humanizing them, and the more the community is humanizing the police officers, the less likely these really egregious misunderstandings are to come up. Again, within the police department, promoting these core values and mission statement. We see a really great example from within Lancaster with the Lancaster Fire Department. The fire chief is a relatively recent arrival to Lancaster, similar to Chief Bay, and they actually know each other. They served in the military together, so that's a really helpful connection. And when he came in, the Lancaster Fire Department was very poorly ranked and didn't really have a solid training process. And he went through and reformed their whole training process and made very clear expectations, and has really made a huge difference in the fire department's performance. And so we hope that Chief Fay can learn from the fire department and the fire chief's experience coming in as an outsider and really rebuilding the training practices. We're recommending that they promote and expand this police cadet program that's already in the community. So this is a program that's set up to reach out to high school students who are from Lancaster and try to bring them into the police department. So they are sort of junior police officers in a way, and then they're able to join the police department. And so this would be a way for them to get more officers from the community, because feeling ownership and residency seems to be something that was really important to. There were 2 police officers that we interviewed that were frequently referred to by stakeholders as these really standout officers that the community really knew and appreciated. And so the 2 of them grew up in Lancaster, and they seem to be serving as this very narrow bridge right now between a police department that's mostly from outside the city and the residents in the city. So really figuring out a way to bring in more of these community members and make the police department part of the community is certainly something that we hope that they aim to do. And then when it comes to the training practices, we pulled ideas from Camden, New Jersey, Baltimore, and then Eugene, Oregon, who have worked on very specific de-escalation training and use of force policies that have generally been recognized to be effective training, because it's not just about adding training, it's about adding effective training. So learning from those cities about how they are teaching de-escalation to their officers. And this is one that they've started making progress on, where they have now 2 social workers working in the police department. But we recommended them looking at Eugene, where they have been able to really expand their social work team to take the lead on issues of mental health, homelessness, substance abuse, and other welfare calls, because those are calls where the police officers feel very much like their hands are tied. There's not much they can do in those situations. And that if they have the social workers who can sort of refer to these supports and help in those situations, that would be a more effective form of policing. So we're hoping that they can learn from some internal best practices and from some external best practices. And with each of these suggestions, we are recommending that they, test them out and see if they're working, see how they're working, talk to the stakeholders and understand what the response is, so that they can learn more about the problem and more about what solutions might really work as they go. With that, I will pass it to Revanth.
Thanks, Anne. Considering that this problem is complex, it's important to recognize that there's a lot to learn in this problem, and the learning can be achieved through the different strategies that have been shared here. So it's not possible to give 3 recommendations and just say, figure that out. That's difficult. Hence, we actually recommended that our authorizers learn through these strategies, which include establishing a team that continuously gathers insights from the community, creating spaces for reflection and synthesis, using specific tools, measuring success for interacting with new people, and continue to focus on building trust within the police department as well. Moving to the next slide. I think these learning strategies can be implemented through the following action agenda: building new relationships across city and engaging in trust building conversations with community. These first 2 points go together in addressing complex problems that are shared by many people in the community. It's important that it's important that new relationships are built and trust is at the center of solving this problem. Though it might take time to build trust, the results of trust building conversations with new members can have long-lasting shifts. Reflection on such conversations, doing this reflection together is another key strategy that we recommended in the action learning agenda. While a number of actions can be implemented to address this problem, it is of utmost importance to come together frequently and reflect on what is working and what is not. This reflection, we recommend that is done in a group with representatives from different walks of the community, and the engagement of the joint reflection can further foster meaningful next steps and shared accountability and unpacking of blind spots. As a third action item, we are saying that working to strengthen new relationships and framing these relationships as a partnership between community and the police, so that the onus of solving this problem is not just on one stakeholder, but it's actually shared by everybody in the community. And in addition to this, it's important to frame these relationships that exist between the community and police as partnerships, so that it avoids the unequal responsibility in addressing the problem. The second key action learning agenda item that we proposed was to create a culture of open sharing and constant experimentation. This is, as the first point in this, we recommended that our stakeholders, our authorizers, deliberately seek out and meet with diverse people who represent different parts of the community. This is to ensure that the voices which are often heard are not the only voices informing the solution efforts. It's important to have creative ways to reach out to talk to the voices that are not heard and find opportunities towards solving this problem. As a second item, we recommend focusing on outreach to underrepresented groups in the community. To build off of the previous point, groups that are underrepresented in current spaces are the voices that are never heard. Hence, reaching out to these groups through organizations that already work with these groups can be an effective item to hear these voices as well. As a third item within this second agenda, we actually recommended to curate and share experiences of informal opportunities of police and community bonding. This is a result of our desk research and numerous bright spots that were shared earlier. Shared experiences of informal opportunities help both parties establish a two-way dialogue. Hence, this was recommended as an action learning item as well. And last but not the least is the celebration of smaller success. This is essential to keep the momentum going for both parties, the police and the community. And problems like these can be strengthened by multiple factors, and solutions for such challenges do not emerge overnight. Hence, it's important to identify the small successes and amplify them for the world. Moving forward, if we can move to the next slide, we're going to shift gears a little to talk about how we as a team worked in proposing all of these different recommendations to our authorizers. We had a couple of structures that were common across the different weeks, and our week began with a reflection and synthesis we did in the classroom. This helped us share our successes and challenges and receive perspectives from our facilitators and from other teams working on similar problems. Post this, on the following day, we would engage with a stakeholder meeting. Here, we would be joined with our authorizers, Milzy and Chief Bay. We would share our learnings on the problem, seek the perspectives on what is working and what may not be working, and based on that, we would align on action items. Through these spaces, though these spaces had some structure through these spaces, we had a culture that was absolutely organic, and Chief Bay and Milzy ensured that all of us felt comfortable despite we being outsiders and not coming from Lancaster. The following day was when we had the third structure, where we as students would meet as a team and share our individual learnings of this problem and set next steps for the upcoming week. And finally, in the week at different points of time, 2 or 3 of us from this team would engage with conducting stakeholder interviews with different people in Lancaster, or engaging in identifying bright spots outside of this context that we can use for our work here. And at the heart of all of this was our team constitution, shared accountability and trust. Team constitution was a dynamic document that we created in our first meeting that lists series of norms that would flow together to ensure that we work effectively. And considering that all of us were in different time zones, having this as a living document helped us align on our actions. And shared accountability and trust were 2 really important factors that ensured that our work was smooth. And this built through little actions of kindness that we did for each other. Though initially we did not know each other, through the course of our work, we started developing a sense of accountability and trust that bound all of us. I'm going to ask Seun to talk to the group about the final part of this presentation.
Thank you very much, Revanth. I remember, I would never forget this PDIA, because it was during that time that Revanth got married, and all of us from everywhere in the world were watching. And when the link went down, they had to send him a message that what's going on, please send us another link. So it was a beautiful opportunity to get to know each other. And it was also an experiential learning experience, for us, because we we would normally, this is a course that we normally will do as a theory in class, right? But when we went through the process ourselves, we were able to learn a lot of things. And we would like to share some of the lessons that occurred to us while we engaged in this process. One of it is that we had to restrain ourselves. We had to avoid the temptation of coming to a quick conclusion about the solution, what I personally will refer to as respecting the problem. Because when we looked at the problem, we also we all came to it with some understanding, because we somehow had an understanding of the issue of community police relations in the US. But then we have to avoid that temptation. I remember that during I think it was our third week, I was almost coming to a solution, and Anne had to restrain me that no, we couldn't approach it that way, that we had to listen. And what is very, very clear is that the more you go into into listening to the stakeholders, the more you learn of the problem, and the more humble you'll become about your own initial haughty position. So it's also a very humbling experience. It's very important to understand that complex problems will require entertaining multiple perspectives. We ensure that we spoke with so many people. So what we also tried to do was find people that would normally not come forward with their own, whose voices will not be heard, or who might have some sort of apathy in the community. So it is very, very important to understand that complex problems will ensure, going through this process will ensure that we define the problem properly, so that the diversity that is required in the definition is captured. Another thing is we have to be patient with the process. We should not just jump into action. There's a natural tendency to be action oriented when we want to fix things, and being patient with oneself, being patient with one's team and the stakeholders is very, very critical. The work is to listen, to learn, to better understand the problem, and this will take some time. The other thing is that approaching this with a diverse team also helps to see the problem better. Working with a team of diverse professionals with different cultural backgrounds helps to interpret the nuances with better clarity, and then the final picture of the problem will be clearer. And one final and very interesting lesson is that conversations with the stakeholders themselves helps to increase their own engagement with the problem. The stakeholders, the authorizers, also come to the table with their own assumptions. So we realized that when we engaged our authorizers, when we pushed back, it helped them to better understand what the issues are and what their own assumptions are. So those are some of the very important lessons that we wanted to share with you. The next slide, please. So the conclusion is that many projects fail because brilliant teams spend their time solving the wrong problems. And one of the very good things about PDIA is that it's a process that helps you to define the right problem by seeking the voices of the stakeholders experiencing the problem. So you're sure that you're solving the right problem. Then another thing that we found very powerful with this method is that you will define the entry points that gives the authorizers the agency to start acting. And when the authorizers do something, they see a small result, they are motivated to go on and iterate with you and do something else. That's something that is very noteworthy about this approach. And also, it is very clear that with little resources and little time, we were in Cambridge, and we're doing all the work via Zoom, we're able to actually help in solving a very serious problem. This is a perennial problem in the American society. We wouldn't say that we have the final solution, but then we were able to do something. We're able to get the authorizers to start a process, a journey to the final solution. And in my own final reflection is that I come from Nigeria, and there's a high state of insecurity in Nigeria. A lot of the middle class, a lot of the intellectuals are moving out of the space because of the growing insecurity. But I see that PDIA now gives a tool for these people to remotely engage and help in finding solutions. So I feel that I have increased agency to better understand the problems, right, by working with people. And because of this, this experience on Zoom, where all of us worked on Zoom and remotely engaged in Lancaster City, I feel that this is a tool that can be used to engage and help find solutions by engaging the diaspora of these communities. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you very much. I just want to pick up on something that Sean said, is just to remind everyone here, our students had never went to Lancaster, never met each other. We've got participants in Thailand and India. The entire process has happened virtually, and none of them knew anything about the specific situations of policing in Lancaster. So all of this happened in the short period of 7 weeks. And I'm sure you must have seen from their presentation how much they have actually learned and how many nuances they've pulled from this experience and how much they've learned about themselves as well as the problem. I'd now like to invite Matt Andrews to share some words. Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Salimah, and thanks to the team. I think it's needless to say this is a really important topic and one that I think the learning goes way beyond Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I do think that the methodology here is really well suited to this kind of topic, partly because it does say, let's pause and think about what we're dealing with. Many challenges that we face, I think, you know, really important paper by Maitland in 1995 said that there are many challenges nowadays that have high levels of conflict and high levels of ambiguity involved in them. And those kinds of challenges just become really thorny. They're the ones that when we jump towards solutions, we find that even if it is a good idea that we're jumping towards, we're not dealing with the ambiguity and the conflict around the challenge itself. And there are many of those in society right now, where even if we have a really good idea, even if we have something that we might even call a solution, we need to realize that there are social processes that need to happen, whereby we go through and we discuss, where did the problem come from? Who's affecting the problem? What are the distributional effects of the problem? And those processes of engagement are really important. And the PDIA process really kind of helps to structure that, partly because, as it has been said, it slows you down and says, stick with the problem. And it forces you to speak to people. And more than that, it forces you to bring people into contact with each other. And I think that some of the learning that I hear from here is not so much just the team talking to other people in kind of bilaterals, but almost bringing other people together and seeing how they interact with each other and how you can understand the problem in that way. And that's one of the beautiful things here. And it's a very underrated part, I think, of policy work is how do you foster not just one-on-one discourse, but how do you foster group discourse? And then you as the policymaker observe what that group discourse teaches you about conflict, about ways out of conflict, about the sources of ambiguity that exist in society around really thorny issues. And I think that you guys did an amazing job in kind of fostering some of those conversations. It's one of the reasons why not only do we want you talking to people, but we want you coming back and relating what you learned to your authorizers and then seeing what your authorizers say. So, you know, I think, you guys grabbed a hold of this with both hands, with your hearts, with your minds for a period of time. I want to thank you for that. Milzy and Chief Bay couldn't be with us today, but they also were fantastic, I think, in how they engaged. You know, let's see where this goes to. I think there is a long way to go with this issue in this country and in other countries as well. I hope that the learning that you had in this helps you think about you know, doing this again when you work on these types of issues in the future. Policy should not be about how smart the policymaker is. Policy should be about how we bring the people who face the policy problem and will have to live with the solution together, so that they can engage better after the policy than they did before. And I think that you guys have invested a lot in that. You know, some people will say, well, they didn't solve the problem. Well, we worked for 7 weeks, but you know, to be honest, with these kinds of problems, they may be in that category where they aren't necessarily going to be solved for a long time. It's going to be more moving society using the problem and working through the problem towards a better way of engaging and understanding and living side by side with each other. And I think that you guys have really contributed to that. So thank you for your commitment. Thank you for you know, grabbing a hold of this topic and making it something that you really contributed to. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions and answers or comments that anyone would like to share. You can use the hand raise function on Zoom, and I can then call on you to voice your questions. I'll start off, and then we'll take Katya's question, and we'll take them together, and then our team can answer the questions. My question is, what surprised you? You clearly had some ideas going into this process. You know, you're given this problem, you don't know anything about it. You have to work in a team. You don't know any of these people. They don't even live, you can't meet for coffee either. What surprised you about this process? That's my question. Katya, if you could ask your question as well.
Sure. Thank you, Salimah, and thank you to the team as well for sharing. My question is a bit similar to Salimah's, but I'm curious about the interviews that you had with some of the stakeholders around the problem. Who did you speak to, and what did you learn from them that may have shifted your perception of the problem or shifted the direction of your approach to the problem?
Great, thank you. Over to the team.
Yeah, I can start answering this. And I can answer both questions with one answer, and it's what was surprising is the different perspectives on the problem. For instance, you would speak with someone, probably a resident, who would say, we don't know police officers beyond uniform. They don't want to speak with us. They do not want to engage with us. We don't know them as humans. And we really need more opportunity to engage beyond the uniform. And then you would speak with the police officer and they would be like, we can't speak with community. They don't want to speak with us. They think we think they will shut us down if we try to engage. Or they would say, they don't know us as human beings. They don't know us as people. They don't want to know that. And we are human beings, and we want people to recognize that police officers are human beings. And this just tells you the huge disconnect between different stakeholders within the same community. And that disconnect is just, it also tells you about the lack of structures that would allow for meaningful conversations, and the lack of trust that would allow for that. And it also highlights where the city can really intervene by providing a holding environment that can allow different stakeholders to really meaningfully engage. But this was like a surprising thing, seeing the different perspectives and the disconnect.
I think the other thing that really surprised me, and I think I'm probably not alone, is that I think we all sort of came in with our assumptions about policing in the US, and race in the US, and that these people would be saying this and believing this, and those people would be saying that and believing that. And it was very uncommon that our assumptions were actually validated. So that was really important. I think if you had seen our first fishbone versus what we wound up with, that would be really, really evident that like we all came in saying, you know, we've read about this problem, we've read all of the news articles, we've spent too much time on Twitter, this is the answer. And so really having to, a lot of our assumptions checked along the way.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I'll just quickly add one sentence to everything that's shared. When I heard about this problem, I was just like, oh, it's just a trust issue. Like, we should just get everybody together and they should talk. Like, that's it. I'm just saying, why is it a problem that we should work on? But just the dimensions in which the problem expands itself, to build off of what my colleagues shared, like Awab and Anne, the number of dimensions it goes into and the number of directions it goes into, it's just unfathomable when you stand outside and say, this is what it is. So I think my biggest learning has been just that when you approach a problem like this, never think there is one solution. That's not even possible. Like it's just about exploring all the dimensions and building off from one of those possible dimensions and seeing where it goes.
I would also add quickly that there's also a level of complexity. And one of the clear examples was when we thought that it would be good to have diversity in the police force, because 80 to 90% of those in the police force were of a certain race. And then when we went into the field to try to find out why this other party or these other races weren't joining the police force, we realized that there was a stigma for them to join the police force, because if any of them went into the police force, they're seen as betraying the group. So it makes it very clear that it's a very complex problem and it has to be addressed one after the other and resolved.
I'll finish this off with to answer. I think it was Salimah you said what surprised us, right? And one of the things that surprised me growing up in the U.S., growing up in the South as a person of color, I've always been, I've had a negative view of the police department. And through this whole process, getting to know Chief Bey and what he stands for really changed my view, and talking to different stakeholders changed my own view and my own prejudice against the police department. And I think one of my most memorable times in these 7 weeks was we had an informal chat, police, Chief Bey, Milzy, and all of us, and we were just sharing stories of our police encounters and and even Chief Bey was sharing his story. So it was really great for us to bond and for us to all connect at a human level, and that's basically what the community and the police want from each other as well. So in one of the facets of the problem. So it was really interesting to see that kind of Inception-esque thing happening.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our event session. Thank you very much to our student teams for trusting us, for all the work that you've done, and all of the, I think our authorizers, both Milzy and Chief Bey, were very, very happy with the entry points and all of the ideas that you have shared with them. But we wanted to thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for joining us for this session today. Our next event will be Tuesday, May 4th at noon Eastern Time, and the topic will be access to quality childcare in Burien, Washington. Thank you very much.